Hi, this is Andre Cohen, and I'm really excited that you're here. Thank you so much for engaging us in this conversation about our cultural competency and our cultural agility model. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of uh, the the gap, right? So how do we address gaps in our knowledge, in our ability, in our skills? How do we address that? And so to even think about that gap, one of the things I wanted to share with you is the Bennett model for diversity sensitivity, right? So it's the it's a model that many of you may be familiar with, a tool called the IDI, the Intercultural Development Model. This was its precursor, or its parents, or its parents, or the fundamental construct that is built on. And so, again, using this agricultural model, or this horticultural relational model of or metaphor of using seeds, plants, and fruit, we we want to kind of continue this conversation. And so, on one end of the spectrum of behaviors is the denial of difference. This is suggesting that that folks either don't recognize difference or don't see the benefit of talking about or recognizing differences and commonalities. At stage two, it is the defense of difference, and so here we start to see differences as possibly a challenge, and so we want to maintain, defend off, ward off anything that would impact our worldview, what we've seen, what we've known about the world. And then in phase three, stage three is this notion that we want to minimize conversations about differences and commonalities, right? So we want to get to this kind of colorblind state, this all human beings are human beings kind of philosophy, which we understand has some pitfalls, right? And then we move to stage four, which is actually recognizing that there are differences, accepting those differences, and beginning to understand that we must do something with those differences. And then at phase five, or stage five, is this notion of adaptation to differences, that I'm able to move in and out of different cultural groups. I'm able to nurture differences. I'm able to nurture commonalities. They're not necessarily a threat to myself or anyone, but they are actually assets. And then lastly, this idea of integration, that we're actually able to maximize what people offer, what skills they have, in ways that benefit not only themselves but the organization. That this is a mutually beneficial relationship. And so we move from this kind of ethnocentric or monocultural mindset to a more ethno-relative, or more inclusive mindset. And so those become the backdrop, or the model that we're using to kind of talk about gaps in my behavior. And so when we think about this notion of gaps, what I'd like for you to kind of reflect on is that oftentimes I have in things that I am intending to do. I have intentions, things that I want to do, that I think are important to do. But sometimes, or oftentimes, my behavior falls short of my intentions, or my intentions and my behaviors are not in alignment, right? And so whenever we have this gap, we have an opportunity to develop within that space. Another way to kind of think about that is this notion of a couch to 5K, right? So one typically does not just sign up for a marathon and say, I'm going to just run this marathon, not having any practice or pre-work or planning or skills, or knowing anything about a marathon, right? So there's a developmental process that if one wants to run a marathon, there's some things that you have to do. You have to practice. You have to build stamina. You have to recognize what your pace is. And so these are things that come over time. And so you develop into those processes. One failing that oftentimes happens when folks look at this particular model is that they say, "Well, I am." I am at a lower end of development, or I'm at the bad end of development, or I want to get to the good end of development. And what we recognize is that development is development, but it is your goal that drives whether this is effective development or you are underdeveloped in a particular area. And so when you think about this model of being intercultural, when you think about this model of being developing inclusive mindsets, when you think about developing strategies that create this sense of belonging, what's important to realize is what is your goal, because that will indicate where that gap is. And so the intentions and my behaviors, when they're not aligned, there's an opportunity for development, which leads us to this idea of minding the gap. Right. And so ultimately, what we're looking for, or what we're after, is making sure that we are in alignment with our goals, our values, and our behaviors. And oftentimes, if we're not focused, if we're not thoughtful about those things, our goals and our intentions and our behaviors and our values, they show up randomly, or something will stir me in a particular kind of way, or someone will hit my hot button. And if I'm not focused on my goals, if I'm not focused on what my values are, if I'm not in alignment with my behavior and my intentions, then I may respond in a way that's not effective or leads me to my ultimate goal. And one of the things that I really would like for folks to start thinking about in this diversity space is, how do we get away from this good and bad conversation and talk more about goal effectiveness? Is my communication effective? Is the way that I interact with my coworkers, my patients, my students, my clients, is that effective, or is it ineffective? And if it's ineffective and it doesn't help me reach towards my goal, then that is the behavior that is not aligned, right? And so there is an opportunity to change, to learn, to grow. And so once I'm able to kind of make that alignment happen, that my intentions, my values, my goals, and my behaviors are in alignment, then when I'm engaging with so-called difference, whether that difference is in context, whether it's in personalities or behaviors, I can act accordingly, because I know what my goal is. I know what my values are. I know what my behaviors will do. And I also know what behaviors I need to augment, right? And so when I come in contact with difference, whether it's a cactus outside or a cactus in a home, whether it's a student, a patient, a client, I know I begin to develop this cultural competence enough to realize what it is that I need to do to be effective, as opposed to talking about what's right and wrong. And so when we think about that, that gives us opportunities to build stronger, better, more effective relationships. When we think about being goal focused, about behaviors that are effective versus behaviors that are ineffective, and we stay away from those pitfalls of good and bad, this polarized lens of thinking or creating morality, when we're actually after a certain set of transferable skills and behaviors that can be taught, right? And so that brings us to the end of our time together. I want to say thank you so much for engaging in this process. I hope you've learned a lot. I certainly have, as I've done the research and the study to bring you this particular lesson. And again, I can't wait to see who we become as we continue these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm Andre Koen. Have a great day.